Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we're diving into some seriously fascinating historical data and theological texts about how Islam actually spread in Eastern Europe. History is rarely as simple as the popular myths make it out to be, so today we're going to look strictly at the source material to impartially explore what really happened. So picture the Balkans. When we think of this region, we usually think of deeply rooted Christian traditions, right? Orthodox, Catholic, the whole shebang. But then, smack in the middle, you have Bosnia, a region with a massive Muslim majority. How exactly did that happen? Was it conquest by the sword? An entire population replaced? Well, today, we're going to question those common assumptions by looking at the hard data. Here is how we're breaking things down today. 1. The principle of reason. 2. No compulsion in religion. 3. The pre-Ottoman Bosnian context. 4. The Ottoman census data. And 5. Myth versus historical reality. Section 1. The principle of reason. Let's look at understanding Islamic ideology. Our source cites Professor Mohammed al-Masari, who points out that the concept of deen isn't just a religion in the way we usually think about it in the West. It's framed as a first principle. Basically, it's an intellectual creed that actually demands sufficient reason. You have to intellectually engage with it. It's the foundation from which an entire, comprehensive ideological system is built.
What's super interesting here is how this source contrasts this reason-based approach with, say, emotional manipulation. The kind of psychological tools some evangelical preachers or cults might use to get immediate, overnight results. The text argues that true ideological shift has to be built for the long haul on a solid, rational basis. Emotional highs yield quick results, but they eventually backfire if there's no intellectual anchor.
Section 2. No compulsion in religion. Let's look at the theological framework.
So what does the text actually say? There's this explicit theological rule from the Quran. There is no compulsion in religion. The source explains this isn't just a suggestion. It's a hardline legal and theological boundary. It dictates that an Islamic state literally cannot force a non-Muslim to abandon their belief. Which makes sense, right? Conversion by force is completely incompatible with that requirement for intellectual consent we just talked about. The source gives this mind-blowing historical example of the rule in practice. Some women from the Ansar, the early Muslims of Medina, had taken vows to raise any surviving boys as Jews because they had struggled with infant mortality. Fast forward, the Jewish Banu al-Nadir tribe is expelled, and they take these Ansar kids with them. The Muslim parents pleaded to keep their kids, but according to historical accounts by Ibn Abbas, this is exactly when the no compulsion verse was revealed. The parents were told they had to allow freedom of choice, even to their own children. The kids who wanted to leave, left. Those who wanted to stay, stayed. That is a pretty incredible example of the doctrine overriding parental desires. We see the exact same principle reinforced in diplomacy. This is a quote from a letter sent by the Prophet to the people of Yemen, guaranteeing that anyone who was adamant about staying Jewish or Christian wouldn't be tormented or forced to change. Instead, they'd pay the jizya, a tax for non-Muslim citizens that gave them state protection and actually exempted them from military service. It was a legal framework designed to protect minorities, not erase them.
Section 3. The pre-Ottoman Bosnian context. Setting the stage in the 15th century.
Let's set the scene in Bosnia before the Ottomans even arrived. Back in the 11th century, an independent Bosnian Church was established, operating totally outside the jurisdiction of both the Catholic Pope and the Orthodox Patriarch. They were kind of doing their own thing. But by the 15th century, the source notes this church was on really shaky ground. Because of this, Bosnia was incredibly unique for the Balkans. It just didn't have that deep-rooted structural loyalty to mainstream Christianity like its neighbors did. They were basically religiously untethered. Section 4. The Ottoman census data. The math tells the story.
Okay, get this number, just 1,700. According to Ottoman tax records from 1468 to 1469, right after they conquered Bosnia, there were only about 1,700 Muslims in the whole region, and they were living alongside a massive population of roughly 185,000 Christians. That completely shatters the myth of a giant army sweeping in and replacing the population overnight. The ruling class may have been Muslim, but the population absolutely was not. But watch this trajectory over the next few decades. From that tiny 1,700 in 1468, it jumps to 22,000 by 1485. And then, by 1520, the Muslim population balloons to 84,000. It is a steep, undeniable curve upwards. When we put the whole demographic picture side by side, you literally see the flip happen. As the Muslim numbers go up, the Christian numbers correspondingly drop. from 185,000 down to 98,000 by 1520. And by the year 1600, the data shows a total inversion. Muslims had become the absolute majority in Bosnia and Christians the minority. We're looking at a gradual transition that stretched out over about 130 years.
Section 5. Myth versus historical reality. Debunking the influx theory. So a super common myth you'll hear is that Bosnia became a Muslim state because of this giant influx of migrating Turks who just came in and replaced the locals. But based on the source text, modern scholars have totally rejected that. The Ottoman census data proves there was actually very little ethnic Turkish migration into Bosnia at all. It wasn't demographic replacement from the outside, it was the local Bosnians themselves converting. And here is the absolute clincher. The source highlights that the overall population of Bosnia didn't significantly rise during this entire 130-year period. Think about it. If a whole new population had moved in, the total numbers would have skyrocketed, right? But because the total population stayed relatively stable while the religious makeup completely flipped, the math only leaves one logical conclusion. There was no outside influx. The locals themselves gradually chose to adopt this new ideology over generations. I want to leave you with a provocative thought. Our source material outlines a theology that explicitly forbids compulsion, and the Ottoman census data mathematically aligns with a slow internal shift of belief, not a forced overnight conversion or foreign replacement. If the data shows us that's what happened here, it really makes you wonder, how many other historical narratives of conquest by the sword do we just blindly accept without checking the local records? Keep questioning those myths, always let the data tell the story, and keep digging into history. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.